Hello and welcome. Elena Rarick here with Transform Publishing. I am here with a very special client, Henry Sauce, his sons, his triplet sons, Jordan, Jonathan, and Tyler. And today we are going to have a chit chat about their experience and impact of the Rite of Passage weekend that Henry did with each of them. So, welcome, guys. How we doing? Thumbs up.
Good.
Good. All right. So I don't think anybody can see the names on the screen. So, Jordan, you want to give a little wave so everybody knows who you are? There's Jordan and Jonathan and Tyler. Awesome. Yes, they are triplets and they do look exactly alike, don't they? No. All right, Jordan, we're going to start off with you. Question number one. As you look back and knowing that it's been 22 years since your rite of passage weekend, where your dad and the other men initiated you into manhood, tell us how your specific weekend impacted your life.
I would say for me, just off the top of my head, and the primary reason would be purpose. It set a foundation for a direction as a early teenage freshman in high school young man. The direction is what I remember the most and what I still continue to use today. As part of the weekend, as I'm sure is expressed in the book, is we were required to develop a mission statement that not only applied to us, but that was impactful to others. And before we could leave the spot that my dad took us to develop the mission statement, we actually had to memorize it. And so I'm sure we all still know our mission statement that we memorized that day, but it's also probably changed as we've grown and gotten older and gained families and kids. And so the premise of it was direction, purpose, be mission minded. And so not only mission minded, but people focused.
Very good. How about you, Jonathan? Do you need me to repeat the question?
Sure, if you don't mind.
Sure. So, as you look back and knowing that it's been 22 years since your rite of passage weekend that your dad and the other men did with you to initiate you into manhood, tell us how your weekend impacted your life.
So I think it was a pivotal turning point for me. It was, as Jordan mentioned, an opportunity to develop a mission statement for our life, and in particular for my life and what I saw as my heart and my passion and how I saw the world. And so that's a mission statement that, with a little bit of alteration, I still stick to this day. I think the other piece for me that it really gave me was a sense of confidence that the world throws a lot at us. It throws a lot at men, it throws a lot of expectation in terms of what it means to be a man, whether that's age or money or status or relationships. And that can be pretty tough to deal with sometimes in terms of knowing who we are, in terms of knowing who I am. And so I could always go back to that one weekend and have the blessing that was my dad honoring me and saying, no matter what the world tells you, you are a man and I recognize you as an equal. And that was a powerful lesson for me.
Very powerful answer as well. Tyler, how about you? Do I need to repeat the question?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay.
I would echo the sentiments and conversational aspects that Jordan and John put forth. I think in my head it was down to the mission statement, which is really a defining cornerstone of the experience. I think when you ask a teenage man or son to go ahead and memorize it, to Jordan's point, and have it be meaningful, those two things are very different, especially when you're tend to be a little bit more immature when you're in your teenage years. So I distinctly remember the mission statement being an interesting thing I had to develop and had never had to do that before. I think the reason why it was difficult is because it had to be authentic, and the authentic part of that is something you had to only gain from doing some introspection, with yourself during the weekend. I think the other thing that it helped me understand, or I guess cracked open the egg, so to speak, was just the ability to be vulnerable with yourself about things that, as John pointed out, are not commonplace considerations that a man has to deal with. And those two things, I think, were the standouts for my experience.
Very good. Well, I know none of you have read your father's book yet, and it's just about finished. And based on your answers, I really know you're going to be very happy with the work that he's done and everything that he has told the readers. And I loved reading about each one of your weekends and how you developed your mission statements and all of that. So all of that is included in the book. So let's go on to question number 2. Jordan, what are some of the memories, highlights, or stories that stick with you regarding your rite of passage weekend?
I would say for me, memories are sometimes hard to come by, with the busyness of life, with the length of time that has expired since then. Some days it's hard to remember what I did yesterday or last week, never mind 22 years ago. But there are several things that I generally remember. The specifics, somehow escape me, but I remember the weekend being one, a surprise, not knowing it was coming, or I knew it was coming because the other two brothers had already gone the weekends prior, but I didn't know anything about it or what to expect. So it was a surprise, and I remember that it was just a good time alone with my dad. It was camping essentially. He took us to a wooded piece of property that a member of the church owned, and on that property was a real life teepee, and it was camping in the woods, except instead of a tent, it was a teepee. And we played catch with a baseball. We skipped rocks on a pond. We slept in the teepee. We had campfires. We cooked, and obviously we worked on our mission statement and the introspection that Tyler was talking about. But ultimately, I think the key takeaway for me was the time that I got to spend with my dad, and the investment in that. Him investing the time in me was hugely beneficial. The last night where we had to spend the last night alone on the mountain inside the teepee, I remember obviously the circle of men that came. I don't remember the specific men. I have the picture somewhere around my house, but I remember that they had daughters, and their perspective was pretty important because it was new to me. Obviously, I grew up with two brothers, and so their perspective was important because I wanted to take it to heart as part of the learning, the growing, the education that the weekend as a whole was providing me.
Very good. All right, Jonathan, do I need to repeat the question or are you good to go?
I think I'm good to go. So there are a couple distinct memories that really stand out for me on the weekend. And like Jordan, I had no idea what was in store. I just knew that it was a weekend with my dad, and there were no further details other than I think there was a packing list about what we had to pack. And my brother Tyler had gone the weekend before, but he was mum's the word, and so I had no idea what to expect. And so I just remember being with my dad, going out and driving in the backwoods of Ohio at night. It was pitch black and it was raining a little bit. And I wasn't sure where we were going, was completely lost. This was before the days of GPS being just on your phone all the time. And we ended up pulling up to a friend's house from church, hiking up to this teepee, mostly in the dark. And that began the great adventure, I think, is spending a couple of days really looking at scripture and what it means to be a man. I know that we had, in terms of developing our mission statement, also had Bible study with my dad earlier that day in terms of looking at what are the things that scripture says about what it takes to be a man, just so we would be informed as we were crafting our mission statements and really pondering that transition from boyhood to manhood. And there is a fun story, I'm not sure if it made it to the book, about a fun and maybe sad story about a campfire and a poor froggy Not sure if that one made it into the book or not. But I think the other two takeaways that I had were that, as Jordan mentioned, the last night, and so there were about 10 to 12 guys from church, and who were older men. I was in my teens. Most of them were, I think the youngest one was probably in their late 20s. There were 2 or 3 of those guys, but most were fathers who were in their 40s or 50s, and just wise, godly men that I knew, that I had relationships with. And the powerful part for me was not only that they had come to really honor and celebrate me and that transition, but that they also offered a lifelong phone call, right? A lifelong relationship and friendship and mentoring relationship. And I have, over the years, called almost all of them. There are a couple that I've lost touch with, but I would say that out of the 10 or 12, I've kept in pretty good contact with about 8 or so. Now, on a regular basis, calling them just to check in, but also calling them when I needed advice from a wise, godly man. And so that was a powerful time for me, and obviously forged some really lifelong relationships. If you want to know the road ahead, ask those who have already been there or ask those who are coming back.
Very nice. I like that you're still in connection with them. And yes, the packing list made it into the book. And back to Jordan, so did some of the pictures that you say you have. Those are also in the book, along with a lot of other goodies. Jonathan, would you mind refreshing everybody's memory about the frog? Because there was a mention of it, but I would like to hear your story of it.
Sure. Yeah. So it was fairly cold and a little bit rainy on the weekend when I was there. And my dad and I were sitting around a campfire, and there was a frog, that just a small frog, that ended up jumping into the ring of stones that surrounded the campfire to keep warm. And I, like all good young enterprising youth, had learned that frogs, once you put them in water and you turn up the temperature, they can die, because they just don't detect temperature change the same way that we would normally do. And I asked my dad what I should do about it. And he said, well, take the shovel that we had and put it on the inside of the ring of stones. That'll kind of scare it, and it'll, jump out of the ring of stones and away from the fire. Well, I tried that. Great advice. So I put the shovel on the inside of the ring of stones, and the frog jumped over the shovel into the fire and died. And so ever since then, it has been the poor froggy, and had a little burial ceremony for the frog. I was very sad. It was very sad, just standing there like I was trying to help you, and jumped over the shovel and died. So a little burial ceremony, a little prayer, and carried on with the weekend. But that memory is always stuck with me.
Yes, he did not go that much into depth. That is a good story. Thanks for sharing. All right, Tyler, do you want me to repeat the original question?
No,
I had one more thought too,
Yeah,
if that's all right.
of course.
So I had the same kind of experience as Jordan did on the last night when it came to staying in the teepee. But my last night was it was a torrential downpour with lightning everywhere. And so, Jordan, I don't know if that happened with you, or Ty, if that happened with you. But my dad, after spending a day or two up there, went down the mountain and left me up there by myself. And just a powerful night. I could still remember it, see the lightning vividly, and hear the thunder. So
Yeah.
great time.
That is very scary for somebody. And I like how you mentioned that was before the days of GPS. It reminded me, we call those the Zach Morris phone days. Remember, I'm sure we're all the same age. So
Yep.
back then, yes. And so which one of you was it that I read stacked chairs in front of your teepee? Or stacked something in front of the door?
that was probably me.
Okay, great, Tyler. It's your turn to talk anyways. So I am going to repeat the question just for anybody watching this who might want their memory jogged. What are some of the memories, highlights, or stories that stick with you regarding your rite of passage weekend?
So echo the last night of the weekend. I will say I'm very proud that I kept it a secret so that you all could have a very good weekend. You're welcome. I would say that the meeting of the men in the circle, so to speak, it was a shock to me. It was a surprise. Not I guess in twofold. Who they were was a surprise because I didn't know what to expect. And the second thing is that they were wearing masks. So when I was able to see, I think I was blindfolded. I was seeing other people who were wearing masks. So I had no idea who they were. And so the shock of them taking off their masks was a surprise to me. And then the realization that it was people that I knew kind of amplified the closeness of the moment, so to speak. I will say that the other memory is just being alone on the mountain. You know, when you're a teenager and it's dark and pitch black and so forth, you start to ask start to question very basic definitions, like, you know, a normal man wouldn't be afraid of this kind of thing. But realizing that in you know, manhood in the traditional sense, I guess, is facing things that, and I guess manning up, if you will, has been called in the past, where you are asked to do things that a traditional perception is of a man, which is defend yourself, defend your home, you know, all these various things, and there's little to no emotion from it. I was scared because I was alone, and so I stacked coolers and chairs in front of the TP door so that I could feel safe. And so I think there's a natural bridge between living in your parents' home and feeling safe with your parents, and then moving out and growing into a man and feeling safe with yourself. And I think the bridging between that is a lot of open and unanswered questions, or open-ended questions around how does a man feel safe? How does that manifest itself in one's life? And what are the implications of that for others? You can kind of go down the track and start to think about, well, how do I get from feeling comfortable in my own skin, living my own life, protecting myself? And I think the evolution of that is for people who, you know, Jordan and I have kids right now, that now evolves into how do I protect my family? So you kind of come through the circle of life where once it was just my dad having those emotions and those affiliations, so to speak, with kids and so forth. And now we are coming full circle years later to feel and recognize the same kind of constraints. So that's an interesting perspective.
Very, very inspirational as well. So thank you all for those answers. All right, back to you, Jordan. Question number 3. We have a total of 4 questions. Question number 3, what advice do you have for other parents who are considering doing a similar rite of passage weekend for their children?
I think my advice is simple. It is be intentional and be present. It doesn't have to be like what's written in the book. It doesn't have to be exactly how my dad did it 22 years ago. Ultimately, it has to be how it best fits you and your relationship with your child. And the way you learn that, and the way you should develop that type of weekend, is by being intentional and being present with your child. And that way you get to know them beforehand. That's part of your preparation. But then it also allows you to best guide them when you do that weekend. Or if you don't do the weekend, it's how you can guide them through life on a day-to-day basis with intentional conversations. So that would be my advice to parents who want to do this, is be intentional and be present, regardless of what it looks like in your child's life.
So I hear what you're saying, maybe leave cell phones at home to be fully
Yes,
present.
unless you need the GPS. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and that was the whole premise of going up on a mountain, is there's no technology, there's no distraction. It is you and nature and the people that are with you, aka my dad. And so it's either my dad, it's my own thoughts, or it's the sounds of nature. And that's it. It was a very well planned and intentional move on my dad's part. The environment is what helped create the atmosphere for the trust, the introspection, the listening, the talking, the thinking. So yes, distractions can be detrimental.
Awesome. I want to throw a curveball at you, and you are allowed to plead the fifth because I'm throwing a curveball at you. You had made the comment that getting to know your child even before, because that's part of the process. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Uh, yeah, I believe it's, again, being intentional and being present in your child's life. Uh, I have a very demanding job. It's 24/7, 365, or at least it has the potential to be. And sometimes I'm away from my daughter more than I want to be. And now that she's getting to be the age where she recognizes that I'm gone, I realize the impact that my absence has. Because when I come back, let's say from a week-long training class or conference that I had to attend, then it takes a few days for her to warm back up to me. Whereas before the conference, it was already, we were buddy buddy, and it was great. And so the absence, and I think we can see it in a broader scope in society. Absent fathers make it more difficult. It's not impossible, but make it more difficult for young people, boys and girls, teenagers alike, to find the direction. And oftentimes there's overcompensation in different areas, whether it's girls looking for guys, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, whether it's something that's not even potentially dangerous, if you will, like investing in sports or becoming a workaholic and working two jobs as a teenager. And so you can see the impact and the effects of a present and well-intentioned parent. And so that's what I mean by getting to know your child. Is you have to invest the time, because you can't get that back.
Very good. Very inspirational and motivational. Thank you. All right. I am going to repeat the question. For Jonathan, what advice do you have for other parents who are considering doing a similar rite of passage weekend for their children?
So I think my advice is simple: just do it. I think that my dad is able to was able to create a weekend that he knew would appeal to us, right? Going up on a mountain or going up on a hill, had a friend who had that great environment with a teepee where we could get away. I realize that may not be the situation that everybody is living in. They may not have access to a teepee in nature with the ideal conditions. They may live in a urban or suburban area where that's just not an option. I think that the important part, kind of as Jordan mentioned, was know your family, right? Know your kids and know your circumstances, and be able to adjust and adapt to those. And so my dad's weekend, our weekend, with my dad was really just one way that this can play out. I agree with Jordan about being present, about electronic devices probably being more distracting than useful. But I also think that my dad taking us on a weekend was not just a matter of the weekend, right? That was months and years of time developing relationship and understanding us, and frankly, working on his own self and working through his own junk to be healthy enough that we would honor and respect him, but also the other men, in our case, that he brought into our lives, those mentors from the church in particular. I think there are unique challenges that might be posed if you're a father wanting to do this for a daughter. I think or a mother wanting to do this for a son. But I still think that as long as you have a good relationship and that you are investing in that beforehand, and that your intent is really to honor your child, I think the sky's the limit. And so even if it's not a weekend, it can be a day, right? It can be a couple hours, it can be an afternoon, it can be scaled to whatever is within your ability to do. But I think the key components with it are taking time away, just the two of you, to think deeply, to study, in our case, what it meant to be a godly man, based off scripture, have time to write a mission statement, and some extra time to think, and then a group of elders that you can bring along, even if it's just 2 or 3 people, doesn't have to be 10 or 12, but if it's 2 or 3 people you can bring alongside your child to help advise them, give them wisdom now, but also in the future. And so I think if you've got those elements together, packaged in anywhere that you want to take it, I think that's a recipe for success.
Very good. Tyler, you're up.
So I would echo the sentiments from Jordan and John. Obviously, that's the benefit of going last in this question and answer session. So thank you. I will probably just emphasize one point, which is the weekend just needs to meet the moment of your particular of your son. And so this is just what does what does he like to do? Where would you go to make it more meaningful? So I would just emphasize the authenticity piece of it. And I think one of the things that John mentioned that I'll also emphasize is having the ability to expose your kid to the fact that there's other people out there that can act as mentors and guides in addition to your father or your parents, and having a relationship that is of that trust and of that level of trust and that provides that deep insight that you need, that you can really take to heart. I think that is another level of awareness and benefit, I guess, that you want to make sure you kind of illuminate in the weekend.
I really appreciate all of your answers. You guys have done such a fabulous job going in depth and really giving us some insight from your perspective. And after reading your dad's book, Honor Our Sons, it's very, very neat for someone like me who has read it to now be able to hear from you. So we're going to wrap this up with one final question. And Jordan, we're going to start with you again. And this question is, what would you like your dad and the other men who participated in your rite of passage to know about your adventure weekend?
I think the first thing that needs to be said is thank you to my dad for planning it, for having the foresight and the forethought to put it together, because of the importance and the magnitude that it continues to have in my life 22 years later. To the other men, thank you for taking the time to participate in something that was probably unfamiliar. I don't know of many, if anybody else that has gone through a similar type of initiation weekend. And so it was probably new to them as well. And so I want to take the time to honor their decision to participate in something that's probably new to them as well. I also want to thank them briefly for, again, their perspective, their insight. As John mentioned, they've been there before. And so life is too short to make all the mistakes yourself. And so if you can hear somebody, listen to somebody who's been there, made mistakes, learn from them, grown from them, and in hopes of avoiding them yourself, that's like laying out a path of stone across a pond where they say, okay, you can step on this stone and this stone and this stone, and your feet won't get wet. And so their insight, I think, deserves some thanks as well. I would also like my dad to know that what he did is meaningful. It was meaningful, and it still is meaningful in my life. And again, I go back to the strong point of having to develop a mission statement that was not only focused on me, but meant for others. And so it has shaped who I am. It has shaped what I do. And it is something that impacts me mentally. And most of the time I act on that as well. And because it's not all about me, it has to be about others. But in order to be about others, I have to know who I am first and be strong enough and confident enough in who I am in order to share who I am and what I can offer with others.
Very good. In your dad's book, he talks about how these can impact generations to come. Just a nod of a head for all of you. Do you feel that it will impact your children and your children's children and passing this on? Yes.
Oh, I certainly hope so.
Yes. It seems that way from all your answers. All right, Jonathan, what would you like to say to your dad and the other men who participated in your rite of passage weekend?
I echo Jordan's sentiments. The first is thank you, and the thank you is to my dad for, like Jordan said, being able to conceive of this and then put a plan into action. I also want to thank the men who invested in my dad's life, and he had some great mentors and great brothers to come alongside him and help him to mature and grow as a man, and help to give him kind of the perspective that I think gave birth to the idea of having a men's weekend to honor each of us and to recognize that transition from boyhood to manhood. And so thank you to my dad, thank you to those men, and then for the men who participated, I want to thank them as well. The opportunity to hear, like Jordan said, the men who had laid stones down across the pond, and depending on how you look at life, that pond might have been hot lava, and being able to avoid some of the missteps. And I will never forget listening to those men share with me their life advice, but also some of their greatest regrets, in the hopes that I would not follow down the same path. And their vulnerability and transparency on that night, and also in the decades since. I know that I can pick up the phone and call them, and so I would just thank them and say, it's a debt that I cannot repay. It's a debt I can only pay forward. And so, when you speak of generational impact, the the weekend, it absolutely had a generational impact on me, but also, in my ability to impact others, not only my own future children one day, but friends who are struggling with the uh, same kind of life stage, where they're trying to mentor and lead and develop children um, as they become adults. So mostly, thank you to everyone who was involved, and it's had a lifelong impact.
Wow. After reading the book, it really inspired me to want to do this for my own children and have my husband do it for our sons and me for my daughters. But after hearing all of you talk, I'm even more excited to do it. So I really think that you guys are giving great answers. So Tyler, do you want to say ditto to all of that and go home, or do you want to? What would you like to say to your dad and the other men who participated?
I'll say ditto on the thank you part. And that brought up just a parting comment, which is, if this kind of weekend was before its time, and even 22 years later, it probably is, to Jordan's point, before its time for many families and many fathers and sons, or mothers and daughters. But um, the it must have been maybe more uncomfortable for men to participate in that, and even less uncomfortable for us, because they were already men in the eyes of the world. And so for them to participate, you kind of have to regress a little bit and put yourself into a different frame of mind to have the weekend, be as applicable to Jonathan, Jordan, and myself as it was. So in kind of reflecting on that, I can only imagine how perhaps more eye-opening in different ways that weekend was for the other men that were there, as equally but differently as it was for us. So.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you guys so very much for being here, especially at this late hour, getting all of our schedules in sync. And for those of you who are watching, if you are watching this video from the book, congratulations for making it this far in the book, and keep on reading. There's still lots more goodies to come. And if you're watching this because Henry shared it somewhere on the internet and you haven't read the book yet, I don't know how you can make a decision not to read it after listening to these awesome gentlemen give their side to their experience with their rite of passage weekend. So go to honoroursons.com and get yourself a copy today.